Rescued is a podcast of conversations with rescuers and those who've been rescued. It's about the lessons we learn about ourselves, the places we go and why, without judgment, to help us have better adventures, manage risk and deal with the unexpected. We all know the importance of having solid first aid skills when we head off into the bush. A good remote area first aid course not only gives us the technical know-how of what to do in an emergency, but a big part of it is giving us the confidence to step in and act when someone suffers an injury. However, there's something that first aid courses can't really prepare us for that can leave us feeling vulnerable, especially when travelling solo. In this episode, I hear from experienced bushwalker, cross-country skier, runner and all-round adventure traveller Owen on what happened on day 24 of the 650-kilometre Australian Alps Walking trail, when he found himself alone and pushing the SOS button. Tell me a little bit about your earliest memories of time in the bush and specifically the Australian Alps.
My interest in the Alps started back in the primary school days. I suppose the very first trip was I was asked to go skiing with a schoolmate from primary school, and they took me up to Mount Buller for the day. Up until then, all our holidays had been sort of like beach holidays as a family, and to go to the mountains was just something totally foreign to me. So it was very special, and it was weird weather. It started off nice in the morning, and then it fogged in. And that was the most beautiful part of the day, was when the fog rolled in and the snow gums were just disappearing in and out of the fog. And I'd never skied before, but I'd managed to ski a little bit down this slope, and I pulled up when the fog rolled across. And out of, in these ski villages, they have like music playing over the sound system. I first heard this song Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel, and it was just such a fitting moment to hear that song for the first time and to be sort of standing on the side of this mountain with the fog rolling across and just the silhouettes of the snow gums disappearing in and out of the fog was just something that I'd never experienced, and it's stayed with me ever since.
I mean, it's interesting you say the sounds of silence, because that's something that's always struck me of when there's snow on the ground, unless there's a strong wind up in those alpine areas.
Yeah, exactly.
Just the quietness.
Indeed.
And can you remember how you felt, like as a young child, what you were thinking at the time and feeling?
I didn't feel frightened by it at all, even though it was something totally I'd never sort of experienced. But I suppose I'd seen foggy mornings in Melbourne and things like that where we grew up. But it was just so beautiful. That was the thing that struck me. I think it was just I was away from my friends at that moment and just on my own, and just marvelling at the beauty of the mountains and snow gums. Yeah, those sort of twisted trunks and branches that are leaning away from the wind, and it's just something that I'd never seen anything like it.
And describe what happens when the gum gets wet.
Yeah, well, it gets it gets wet, and it just gets a sheen to it. It's the colours really become more intense when it's wet. The pinks and greens and olive green, greys and things like that just take on a different characteristic when they're wet. Yeah.
Talk to me about painting and how that comes with you, when you go to the bush. Like, is being a painter and an artist and seeing things, seeing colours like that, does that influence your time in the bush, do you think?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Painting and my hiking really go hand in hand. I'm always looking at the landscape. I developed an interest in art in year 11 and 12 at high school, and that's as much sort of formal training that I had in painting. But I don't know, when I wander around, I'm looking at colours, I'm looking at the way the ridge lines sort of fall away. They start up above the tree line, you see them sort of disappear down into the mountain ash and alpine ash. And you just sort of bit by bit collect up like a little collection of images in your mind, and they're just nice to draw and paint, and wrestle with it a bit. It's a challenge, but a happy challenge that I really like.
Do you take photos as well, or you focus more on painting?
These days I take less and less photos. I just take them for the sake of a painting, to try and remember something so I don't forget them. But
coming back to your time in the bush and to your experience, so, we talked about the primary school and that first engagement with the Alps. How did that develop into what appears to be a really long and really full, adventurous life that you've led?
Yeah, well, the next time, it was a bit of an interval from there. It wasn't until towards the end of high school that we had a another skiing event where a group of us from high school, when we'd finished the following winter, we went up to Falls Creek this time, and we were staying in a lodge there and downhill skiing during the day. And just so happened that by pure coincidence, one of our teachers from high school, he ended up staying in the same lodge we were at. And I noticed one morning he was heading off with his really strange-looking skinny skis, and I started to ask him, what have you got there? And he said, they're cross-country skis, Norwegian cross-country skis or something, Swedish skis or something that he had. And he explained how it worked and told me that you stick different waxes on the bottom and you can climb up hills with them. And I was fascinated by this, and I said, I wonder if you can hire them. I'd love to come out with you. But one shop had a handful of cross-country skis, and I got lucky. So we headed off from Falls Creek. We went up across the Rocky Valley Dam, which is sort of just outside of the resort area, and up a spur called Heathy Spur, and up towards Mount Nels, which is, I think, the third highest mountain in Victoria. It was a beautiful, pristine day, not a breath of wind. Blue skies, you could see the snowy mountains way off in the distance, and it was just magical and quiet and no crowds. And that was the last time I ever went downhill skiing. I took up cross-country skiing and really got into bushwalking in a big way after that, mainly to look at where you could go skiing during the winter months.
It's sounding like you're hooked on this alpine environment for Victoria and the Australian Alps. Wasn't just in Australia, you've had off-track and quite interesting expedition type experience, not just in Australia, is that correct?
Yeah, what would it be, in the 80s, we spent a bit of time travelling through Nepal and India I think it was 1984, that would have been. A 6-month trip, which was self-guided. Me and my partner headed off to Nepal, and we were told we should get a guide to take us around the Annapurnas, and we managed to find a guide and his friend who was going to be a porter, carry gear for us, and we went around the Annapurna circuit, which was a really nice trip. But we had a lovely time, the four of us. We sort of shared our kind of planning and leading experiences with them, and actually probably by the end of the trip, I reckon they were pretty good guides. So
back in the 80s, that would have been so different too, when I think of today.
1987, we went back to the Everest region and couldn't believe how much the population was really squeezing, and a lot more cars, and it was a very, very different place. So the world changes quickly.
To fill in a bit of background there, from those first early experiences in the Alps, you've also then had years and years of experience in the mountains and bushwalking. Can you just tell me a little bit just broadly about that?
Yeah. Look, I think bushwalking's always been the anchor. Even though cross-country skiing was probably what really sowed the seed for me, but I like the simplicity of bushwalking. It's really minimalist, and you can really scale it back. You don't have to take a lot of gear. You just take what you need to take to be safe and be self-reliant. I think that's what people really need to understand with bushwalking, to be safe and be self-reliant, and you can have a wonderful time. There's no doubt about it.
Tell me when you first became aware of what's now called the AAWT, or the Australian Alps Walking Track, and tell me what that is. To explain to people what the AAWT is.
It starts in Walhalla. Yeah, it's quite low. It's right down near the Thompson River in a small old gold mining town. That's Walhalla, is the gold mining town, and it follows these old railway lines where they used to bring timber and things like that to make mine shafts and things like that. Lots of little networks of sort of benched train tracks running across the hillside. So it follows those along to the Thompson River. You eventually cross the Thompson River, then you start climbing up through Mountain Ash towards Mount Borbor, which is a sort of subalpine plateau, a very beautiful plateau, because it hasn't been burnt since the 1939 fires. So it's a wonderful, very pretty subalpine environment that runs for about 20 k's from one end to the other. Yeah, so that's a nice introduction to the Alps, is when you walk across the Borbor Plateau. And
so from that time, the AAWT has sort of now become longer and bigger than that.
Yes, that's right. Now it's called the Australian Alps Walking Track. It pretty much follows much the same route as the original Victorian part of it, except before you start to head up to Tom Grogan, you end up starting to head more northeast from the Banambra Corryong Road, and it takes you across towards the Cobras and up into New South Wales. You go past the Pilot and you come up near Thredbo at a place called Dead Horse Gap, and you start to climb up onto the main range from there, the Snowy Mountains main range.
Now the full length of the AAWT, how long is that?
It's about 660 kilometres from Walhalla to Tharwa in the ACT.
Amazing. And how long does that normally take people to do?
I think the quickest time that it's been done was just under 11 days from start to finish.
Oh, my goodness.
These two people. And the interesting thing is they tried it twice. The first time they tried to run it and they fell apart physically. The second time they attempted it, I think they worked out how long could they walk each day. And I think they worked out they could walk about 18 hours a day and they would have about 6 hours rest, a couple of hours in the middle of it and 4 hours at the end of it, then get up and off they'd go again.
And so tell me about when you decided to give it a red hot go and what was happening at the time for you.
Yeah, well, look, just before COVID, I started to come up with an I thought to myself, I should try and do the new sections that I hadn't done. So the sections into New South Wales and into the ACT. And I started planning that, and then there were the 2019-2020 bushfire season, so that sort of put a stop to that. And then just as the tracks were starting to be opened up again, along came COVID, and that sort of shut me down again for a couple more years. And I eventually got to have a go at it in 2022, and it all went beautifully well until I ran into troubles on the long spur coming off Mount Bogon.
Massive thanks for the support from the team at Paddy Palin, who since 1930 have been leaders in travel and outdoor adventure. In fact, did you know that Paddy himself, a member of the Sydney Bushwalkers Club, was a volunteer in the original search and rescue arm of the Federation of Bushwalking Clubs in New South Wales? Nice one, Paddy. Let's wind it back and talk about your preparation.
Preparation was very detailed because I had lots of time over COVID. I've got this amazing spreadsheet of about 10 different tabs from everything from distances to food, to where I'm going to put food drops in, to how much my pack would weigh on just about any sort of section of the track after picking up food drops. So it was plenty of time to do this amazing detailed plan on how I was going to pull this all together.
And what about preparing your body? Had you kept your fitness up during COVID?
Yeah. I always another thing I do a lot of running. That's another sort of passion of mine, is sort of running half marathons and occasionally a marathon. But that all came about from bushwalking. It was like an efficient way to keep fit for walking was to go running during the week. So yeah, I've always sort of kept up my running as well as my walking. So yeah, I was pretty fit. Always feels a bit different the first couple of days, but after 3 or 4 days, your feet really settle into your boots. You feel great. That's good.
Okay, so 27 days in, were you?
No, about 21 days. I think it was 21 on the day where things went a bit pear-shaped.
Yeah, so tell me what happened.
Well, about 24 hours before I was going across the Bogon, just finishing the section across the Bogon High Plains and going up over Mount Nelson down towards Roper's Hut, which is on the northern end of the Bogon High Plains. And I camped at Roper's Hut, and then the next day I headed off towards Mount Bogon, and the weather was changing. It became a really toxic night up on Mount Bogon near Cleve Cole Hut. It was roaring sort of front coming through, and my poor little tent held up, but I looked out the door a couple of times. You could see the tent pegs wobbling around as it's coming off. If any one of them comes out, I'll end up back where I started. And but it held out. I think I got about 1 or 2 hours sleep, and the next morning I got up and had a look around and thought, what should I do? Should I just sit out the weather at Cleve Cole Hut for another 24 hours, or should I plug on to Mount Wills, which was my next food drop? And there was also a hut there, and I thought, well, I'm going to start descending to a lower sort of altitude from here on. It'll get lower till I get up onto Mount Wills, and so I chose to plug on towards Mount Wills, and so I put on all my wet weather gear, and it was quite comfortable and warm, and packed up wet tent and got underway. And that all was going okay. I was plodding along for about an hour and a half or so down Camp Valley, then up over a hill called Bosea Hill. Then I hit the long spur, which was nicely cleared a week before the volunteer group from Bushwalking Victoria called Bush and Track Conservation Group had cleared the long spur, which was, although that was wonderful. And
How good are the volunteers, hey?
yeah, they are. They're one. I'm actually a member of that group, so I'm quite involved with them. I knew they were going to clear that track, I was looking forward to it. And I was probably about a half an hour along the long spur, and I felt a bit of a twinge in my right lower back, and thought, probably just something from bad night's sleep, uncomfortable cold and what have you. But within about half an hour, it changed to an excruciating pain in my right kidney area. There were just like waves of hot and cold fever rushing through my body. The pain was like horrendous. I was just shaking and vomiting and really rapidly into a shocking state, and really at first wasn't sure what to do. It just took a while to think about, do I turn back or do I go ahead? And I figured to go back was just walking back into freezing cold, windy weather, and I thought it was probably going to be easier going downhill on the cleared track. And luckily, in part of my planning, I'd gone to see my GP, and he'd prescribed some fairly heavy-duty painkillers for me in the event that I might twist my ankle or break an arm or something like that. So I had some fairly heavy dose pain relief, and to be upfront on it, I had kidney stones about 30 years before, and I spoke to the GP about this, and he said, well, if you haven't had them for so long and you've really well and truly passed that sort of age group where males tend to get them, they tend to get them around the mid-30s to mid-50s, and then they're not so common after that sort of age sort of bracket. So you can't spend your life wrapped up in cotton wool, and I thought, well, I'm just going to keep bushwalking on this.
So true.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything you can do for kidney stones? Like, is there any sort of first aid treatment you can give?
Not really. Pain relief is all they can really do. Initially, when I got them 30 years ago, they did some tests, and back then they had ideas that you could modify your diet, and they took certain things out of my diet, and I've been fairly religious about those, not to things like certain greens like asparagus, spinach, fermented dairy products, oily fish, things like that. So I've been following that, but when I spoke to the GP on coming back, he said, well, you probably didn't need to. He said, that's sort of been debunked now, and it's mainly just about hydration is the best preventative thing. Is just it's not so much diet, it's more about just keeping up your hydration in your daily life.
Because the thing that strikes me, and what is unique about something like kidney stones, or I guess it's anything medical that happens in the bush, like if you have an injury, like you twist your ankle, like you're saying, or you break your arm, something like that, like you can see what's wrong and you can apply first aid if you know how to do that. But when there's something happening internally, there's something happening medically with you, we're pretty complex beings. There's a lot that could go wrong. Like there's so little that we can actually do about it.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the risk element, I suppose, and you just need to prepare as best as you can. Some people have said, maybe you shouldn't walk on your own, but I do a bit of a mix of walking with clubs and with solo walking, and I don't think that the outcome wouldn't have been any different. I was able to manage the situation, and the same scenario would have happened if there was somebody with me. They would have at some point had to set off a PLB, and which I could do anyhow. So, but there, it could have been a lot worse, I suppose. But that's the risk, I suppose.
It is, and I guess it's just about knowing what those risks are, knowing what your own personal risk tolerance is, and then how you mitigate, how you lower risks where possible. So take me back to you'd taken the painkillers. I think that's where we got to. What happened next?
Yeah, I was probably a couple of hours into the day. I took the painkiller, and that was amazing. Wow, it just knocked the edge off it straight away. I thought, wow, this is pretty good. and I thought, Well, what I should do, because it's not going to last forever, this painkiller, and this is going to come back and bite me again. So at that point, I really made a decision. I should try and get off the foot track and get down to at least the 4-wheel drive track, which was a few kilometres on, and even better still to get to Big River Saddle, because if I can get there, it's a clear area and I can put up a tent and shelter and really work out what to do. So that was my decision to plug on. I went on, and about an hour later, sure enough, the painkiller started to wear off and the pain came back like a hammer. Just same thing again, just the waves of pain, the hot and cold sort of sweats, the vomiting coming back, the whole works was just full on. I thought, well, gee, I've only been an hour since I took, you're only meant to take 4 of these things a day. I shouldn't be taking another one an hour later. So I thought I'm just going to have to put up with it, and I plugged on, and gee, at times was that utter madness, like I was really like angry with myself that I was in this situation, and I was taking off my pack and swearing and kicking branches and just really not in a good space at all.
Yeah.
And I plugged on for another hour and eventually got onto the 4-wheel drive track, which was a relief, and I just sort of collapsed there on the side of the track when I got there, and it was just still really toxic weather. It was sleet blowing through and wind, and I thought, well, I'm going to take another painkiller now. At least I'm on the 4-wheel drive track thing. I still really wanted to try, and I had it somewhere in my mind that I needed to get to Big River Saddle. I probably could have set off the PLB there, but I just couldn't shelter. There was steep and wet and just messy. Sort of, I couldn't. I could have wrapped the tent around me or something, but I just didn't know. I had doubts about the PLB. It was a Garmin InReach. It's a US product. It's not sort of networked to the Australian Emergency Rescue Service, which has a base in Canberra. And I don't know if it was the painkillers or the pain, but I started having all these wacky ideas that, what happens if, I set it off and the message goes to a base in Texas, and then they start to monitor there and work out what to do. And I thought, what happens if it doesn't work, or they go home at 5 o'clock or something like that. The time difference and things. Just crazy sort of thoughts. But I thought, no, I'll keep going to Big River Saddle. It's a bit close to the Omeo Mitamita Highway. If I wasn't able to be rescued there, perhaps I could, keep going and get through to the road.
And how fast do you reckon you were able to walk at this time, like in such pain and with so much going on?
Not very fast, yeah.
Like 2 k's an hour tops kind of thing?
Look, when it came to like if there was a slight undulating rise in the Jeep track or something, was just so weak. It could take me, it might be from here to the front gate or something, it'd be a little bit of a rise in it. I could barely get up it, it sort of just felt just shot, absolutely shattered. Yeah. But I eventually got to Big River Saddle, and I put up my tent, and I don't know, it just felt, I think once I got to the 4-wheel drive track, I somehow got a bit of a lift mentally and thought I can get to Big River Saddle. And I got there and I put my tent up as best as I could, as quickly as it was. It's kept the rain off me. I'd say that's about all. And got inside, and I tried to change my clothes. Then I just noticed when I was trying to take my clothes off to put on the thermals, dry clothes and things, that my body was just like, I couldn't undo buttons or drag on thermals. I was just like a shaking mess, absolutely really weak and just shaking. And so I just got my sleeping bag out and wrapped that around me. And I started to, I thought, now I've got shelter, I've got warmth around me, I'll start to fiddle around with the Garmin. And I turned that on, and it all got uncovered the bit. It's got an SOS button, and I pushed it and just waited to see what would happen. Now, virtually immediately I got a message back asking me to confirm it was an emergency situation. What I'd forgotten to realise, even though I was pretty well prepared, I'd studied up on this SOS thing well before I set off on the trail, and I charged up the device again at Mount Hotham where I'd had a rest day, so I was able to charge it up. So it had plenty of charge. It was 100% charge on it. But what I did forget, it has a whole lot of little preset messages where you can just arrow to a yes or a no, but I'd forgotten that it had those, and it's got this really clunky sort of arrow texting type thing that you've got to answer, and my hands are shaking. I'm trying to answer all these questions they're asking, whether you've got food, whether you've got shelter, are you alone? So I'm trying to type yes, no to all these questions, and I eventually seemed to answer them all, and they sent back. Oh, they also tried to ring me on my mobile phone, so I turned that on as well and could see there was no mobile reception, but it actually rang. I tried to answer, but they could see it was a US number because of the +1 or something, but couldn't speak to them. There wasn't enough mobile reception to be able to talk, so I was really back to the Garmin to use that. And they sent a message saying they'd notified Australian Emergency Services of my situation, that it was a medical condition, that of my location, the coordinates and all that from the GPS, and that a rescue was underway.
And how did you feel at that point?
Oh, gee, I felt fantastic, and I thought, I wonder how long it'll take. I was just glad that all that had worked. I didn't feel fantastic physically or pain-wise. I was pretty bad, but I was just relieved that there was communication, and I thought all I got to do now is just sit it out. And then I don't know I think I might have gone unconscious for a while, because the next thing I remember was my tent was shaking. There was a voice outside calling as Owen Morris in there. Then I called out, yes, yeah, I'm here. And the tent unzipped, and I could see these two faces, these beaming, these big smiling faces looking at me from the tent door. And I'll tell you what, I've never been so happy to see two people. They were just absolute gems, just lovely, wonderful, clever people that had two paramedic ambulance people. Well, actually four. Another ambulance turned up a few moments later, but initially two people.
And how long had that taken?
It had taken only 2.5 hours from the moment I pushed the button to when they arrived.
Wow.
I thought it was even shorter. Like I said, I thought, wow, these people just appeared from nowhere, but it had been 2.5 hours. So I must have fallen asleep or gone unconscious for a bit or something, but I was still very painful when they opened the tent door, and my first reaction was to try and just get to my feet, and they said, no, just don't move. And they just kept me lying in my tent, and then eventually he said, look, we're going to move you to the ambulance now. They slid me out onto a stretcher, then put me in the back of this 4-wheel drive, then decided they wanted to they were licensed to administer some pain relief, and they wanted to put a drip in and pain relief through the drip. And they had trouble finding a vein. The poor ambulance guys poking around up and down my arm, my hands, and back of my wrist. But I think my body wasn't in very good condition, and he apologised for treating me like a pincushion. But eventually found a spot and got it in and got some pain relief onto me, and off we went. We went to AMO Hospital there. And I think I must have fallen asleep from the morphine going there, because I don't remember much other than being woken up at Omeo. There were two nurses on duty there, and now they did a wonderful job. Like that, they had to work out what to do with me. They first had a discussion. They should send me on to Bairnsdale, but they spoke to a doctor at Bairnsdale Base Hospital, and he thought it was best to keep me there for the time being and just get the pain relief in better state than what it was. And 2 a.m. in the morning, another nurse, the night duty nurse, woke me up and said, "Oh, you're going on another ambulance ride to Bairnsdale," because she wasn't happy with the heart wasn't behaving very well. It was getting weaker, and so back into another ambulance and off to Bairnsdale. Yeah.
So how far is Omeo from Bairnsdale?
I think it's a good 2 to 3 hour drive. Yeah.
And that first journey from where your tent, where you got picked up, how long's the journey from there to Omeo?
I think that was only a bit over an hour, because I remember just before I went to sleep, the ambulance guy said to me, "Look, we've got a choice here." He's such a character. I remember this bit. He said, "Look, we can take this. We can take the short and bumpy route, or we can take the windy long route. So one route was along a sealed windy road, which takes a lot longer to get to Omeo. Or he said, we can take you down the knocker, whatever the knocker is. It's a track that runs between near Mount Wills and it runs down towards Penambra. And I said, take me down the knocker. I've never been down the knocker, so I'll be happy to go down that. And off we went. And so I think it was maybe about an hour, a bit shorter than taking the long windy road on the bitumen road. Didn't knock me around too much.
Yeah, knock it to sleep.
Yeah. And then in the morning they did MRI scans and all sorts of blood tests and all sorts of things in the morning at Bairnsdale. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the doc said, we're happy, we think the kidney stone has passed through your urinary tract and you're free to go. And he just asked me, he said, look, I don't want you to go back onto the hiking trail. You can go home. At that stage, I said, I rang my brother Peter, who'd been sort of watching. I'd been my sort of emergency contact point back at home. He was aware of where I was, and he offered to come and pick me up. I said, well, gee, if you drive from Melbourne to Bairnsdale, you're going to be another 4 or 5 hours. And so we gave up on that idea, even though he insisted. I just took the train home in the end. And I asked the lady at the desk at the hospital, I said, how often does the train run to Melbourne? She said, it goes about every hour, I think. And so I found out there was a train in about 30 minutes' time, and I just took the train home. And
wow.
I got home within 4 hours. I think I was at Richmond Station in Melbourne, and my younger son came down there and carried my pack home we took the train out to Camberwell, and he carried my pack home for me. So it was a happy ending to get home.
Yeah.
But I was very weak for a long time. I think for the next week I slept and had nightmares about the whole thing. I had kept recurring nightmares about being on the long spur and things just kicking my pack and all sorts of horrible things.
And how long did it take for those nightmares to subside?
Maybe a couple of weeks, I reckon. I was a bit ratty for a couple of weeks with sleep. I'd get up and just go and watch TV at 2 a.m. in the morning and then go back to bed. And just really restless, sort of anxious time.
Does that surprise you, given, your years and years of experience in wild places?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I didn't expect the aftermath at all to be like that. I thought, get over kidney stones and get on with life, but it didn't feel like that for a while.
And how do you feel about that now?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, I reckon the thing that put closure to it for me was a person from Bushwalking Victoria. I told the story. I hadn't told many people about it, but I told them what had happened. They were intrigued by it. They said, look, I said it's really difficult to talk about. And said, well, why don't you write about it? Try writing about it, and it'd be a really good article for Bushwalking Victoria's newsletter, because people often wonder, when is the right time to set off a PLB, and should I set off a PLB? That's the other question. So people are not quite sure what a PLB is. That's a personal location beacon. It's a satellite rescue device where you can set it up and it will take a record of your geographic location and notify an emergency services group. For the Australian ones, it's in Canberra. For my Garmin one, which is US one, as I mentioned, was in Texas, USA. Yeah, so that's really important. I think it's one of the, we like to keep bushwalking simple, but I think if you're going to do solo adventures, I think it's a really reassuring thing to have is a PLB device.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll definitely link to your story in the show notes so people can read about your experience and also about PLB activation, because there's those two different types. There's the PLB itself, that personal locator beacon, and then these other sort of third-party satellite communications devices like the InReach, like the Zoleo, like there's a few other ones, spot trackers as well.
That's right. Yeah. So they're ones. Some of them you can communicate by text message on, which is probably a useful little extra.
Do you have a personal story about an incident or rescue during an outdoor trip when something didn't quite go to plan? Maybe you got lost, injured, let down by some gear, preparation, or something else. Look, honestly, it can happen to any of us at any time, regardless of how experienced we are. And it's by sharing these stories and tales that we can all learn and help to avoid them in the future. So if that's you, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email to rescued@lotsoffreshair.com. That's rescued with a D. It was interesting when you said that you turned on the device and you'd recharged it, because things like those devices, they've also got like GPSs and tracking in them as well.
Yeah.
And mapping.
Yeah.
But you weren't using that for this trip?
No, I put a lot of work into it. I did like a little test run up north of Mount Borbor where we plotted a route along the Alpine Walking track and loaded that on. So you do that on your desktop computer and you can pull up the map on the Garmin software and you just plot out the route along the Alpine Walking track where it goes. And the only thing I don't like about these, you're looking at this little screen all the time and you're following somebody, like this sort of line, or you download somebody else's route and you follow their line. But I don't know, I quite like the old map and compass. It's something I'm very comfortable with. I had a lot of training with it through a course I did through the Department of Sport and Recreation many years earlier, and I've always walked that way. And so I didn't need to use it. I was able to just use map and compass. At times the AAWT is not a clear path. It's purely a route. It's overgrown, and you really need to know how to navigate to be able to get along. That's really, really important in some parts. The poor volunteer track clearers can't keep up with it all, and the land managers seem to be struggling too, whether it's funding or time or resources, whatever. But a lot of it's not a pristine track like some international tracks are. It's a really tough route, but a very interesting route all the same.
Thank you for answering what probably could be a question in many people's heads if they're just hearing about this track for the first time. Because I think in Australia we think about, those long distance tracks. We've got the Hyson Trail in South Australia. There's the Bibbulmun in WA. But the AAWT is quite different in terms of just how much of a track it is versus a route, as you described. It's an idea that is on a map that doesn't necessarily translate to the ground.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you've got to approach it with a bit of a common sense approach at time. You've got to think, well, if this was me, where would I put the track? So usually it follows ridge tops and things like that. So as long as you keep those sort of ideas, that if you can't find the actual track, if it's kind of disappeared or you feel like you're getting off it, just always think that it's probably going to follow a ridge line, and just get back up onto the ridge that you might have sort of wandered off, and try and sort yourself out there. And I used to every night before I'd go to sleep, I'd look at the map for the next day. I'd sort of plot out any sort of compass bearings that I think might be tricky bits, sort of prepare myself a little bit in advance, so the next day I didn't have to fiddle around too much with the map. It all went pretty smoothly. It's a nice way to walk, just with map and compass, and you don't need to worry about charging your devices. Like when I got to Mount Hotham, I'd had the PLB being turned off, and I had 2 days rest there, and I played around with it a bit, and when I got there, turned it on, it was 100%. And somehow I didn't turn it off properly, and I just thought I'd just check it again before I leave Mount Hotham, and I noticed it was down to about 40%, so somehow I didn't turn it off properly, and that delayed my sort of departure from Mount Hotham. I waited for it to charge up to 100% again. A couple of hours it took to charge up, and then off I went.
So last couple of questions for you. The first is, what would be your advice to people who were thinking of undertaking the AAWT, given that, you've had so much experience on it?
Don't bite off more than you can chew. Just don't come up with an idea. If you haven't done a lot of walking, don't be in a hurry. Go out and just enjoy walking. Do some little sections of it, maybe 2 or 3 days at a time. Get a feel for what it's about, the scale of it, the time of it. A lot of practical sort of preparation is really, really helpful. And again, at home, you can really plan it to detail these days with Excel spreadsheets and weighing your gear and weighing your food and plotting how many metres up and how many metres down, and even working out walking times. There's formulas for calculating your walking times and things like that, and given the terrain and what have you. So yeah, just take your time and don't be too ambitious. Just go out on the trail and plan well and enjoy it as much as you can. Just don't be in too much of a hurry. Be flexible. You'll get some toxic weather somewhere, or you might have a medical incident too, which might sort of curtail things for a while too. So just take your time and plan well.
So speaking of curtailing things for a while, do you have plans to go back and pick up where you left off?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I'm just starting to toy with those ideas, but I probably won't do it in one big continuous section. I'll just break it down into, maybe 5 days max at a time, something like that, and do it over 3 or 4 sections. And this particular painting was a bit of a story too. The idea for that came up on just on the train home. I had this sort of wacky idea of doing a painting. I don't very often paint with a character in my paintings, but this time I did. Yeah. So you've seen the picture, but it's a pretty crazy painting. But it's also one of my stronger paintings, so it helped. But I sort of did that at the same time I was writing.
I really love the painting, Owen. Oh, it's amazing. Well, Owen, thank you again so much. It's been so great to hear your story and to hear someone with your amount of experience, but also talking through that thing you can't plan for and you can't, really treat in any other way, which is having a medical emergency in the bush, and also that experience with operating an InReach, a PLB-like device, and having such a great outcome.
And thank you too. This is part of it too. Your podcast is a nice little part of it as well. So thanks for interviewing me.
Oh, look, the whole aim is by sharing stories, we all learn, we all learn about how we can make our experiences better. We can learn about things we maybe hadn't thought about when it comes to spending time in the bush, hearing about someone who's actually pushed the SOS button and how long that took and that process. It's all great learnings. And also I loved your detail of the spreadsheets in your preparation, just by preparing, making sure you had good gear with you. You took really wise choices, getting out of the toxic weather, as you called it, getting down into the saddle to set up your tent. Just really well thought out.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing under such trying conditions. Usually my mind's a fairly messy space, and particularly that day, but somehow I managed to string it together. I don't know how, but it was a good outcome. Yeah,
great outcome. Well, look, I'll link to your story in the show notes for the podcast as well. And thank you again. All the best, and I cannot wait until I hear the end of your Australian Alps Walking track experience. The Rescued podcast is produced on the unceded lands of the Gundungurra and Darug people of the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge their enduring connection to and care for country. Special thanks to our sponsors, Paddy Palin. This has been a Lots of Fresh Air production.